On this episode of the show, I have with me Peter Harris. He is a partner at the University Growth Fund. We're going to be talking about a lot about the University Growth Fund. We're going to let Peter explain to us what they do over there. And we're also going to talk about how he actually has built a slightly different fund and how interns are actually at the center of that universe and how portraying that authentically is part of what his mission is. Peter, I'm super excited about this one. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Emmer.
Absolutely. Okay, University Growth Fund. Tell us a little bit more about what you guys do.
Yeah, so the high level is we manage about $100 million, so it's a real fund, but then we have 50 to 60 students who are really empowered to run the fund. So I joke that my job there is to get coffee for the interns so they can do the fun part, which is meeting with founders, doing due diligence, making investment decisions, and then supporting those founders along their journey and helping them be successful. And by doing so, students gain this incredible real world experience that allows them to land incredible jobs. Hopefully we make good investments, so our investors make money, and these founders get capital and help from our students in ways that are unique relative to the other capital they're raising.
Absolutely. And let's actually, people are going to have heard that statement, and they're going to probably be like, okay, interns aren't actually doing this. But just to clarify to the model, just to make sure we're on the same page, when we talk about who is making the decisions versus who's doing the legwork. I mean, you mentioned to me that the interns are at the center of this program. You just referred to that, but talk to us a little bit about what that actually looks like.
Yeah, so there are a lot of checks and balances. You don't convince people to give you, $100 million without some, checks and balances. And that actually doesn't even matter if you're a student or not, right? And so what we've built is the typical path is I meet with a founder. I ensure that it fits our box so that we're not going to waste the founder's time as well as our students' time. And if it all checks and is this feels like something we would potentially invest in, then I introduce that founder to our team. The team gets access to the data room and they'll tee up a call and ask the founder a bunch of questions about their business, which is really this incredible learning opportunity for the students, right? To be able to ask hard-hitting questions to founders and really dig in. So the students prepare what becomes a 40 to 80-page investment memorandum. And then that team of usually call it 5 to 10 students out of the 50 to 60 in our program will then pitch that deal, assuming they like it and everything checks out, to the rest of the students. And so every student has the opportunity and frankly also the obligation to read through the materials, to ask questions, make sure they really understand the deal, and then vote on whether or not we should move forward. If they approve it, then we have an investment committee that's comprised of some incredible investors who have graciously allocated their time to help us underwrite deals, but also to help our students learn. And so that same team will then pitch to that investment committee, which really acts as more of an advisory committee. And then they provide a recommendation to move forward or not. At which point my partner and I, who are the technical fiduciaries, will move forward with the deal. And so there are these checks and balances, but I actually technically don't have a vote on that investment committee. I have a final say, but typically what happens is, we're not going to move forward with a deal if it doesn't pass the student stage and it doesn't pass that advisory stage. And so really the students are the ones kind of driving a big chunk of that entire investment decision-making process.
That's really cool. And I guess when we're thinking about this, and this crossed my mind and I was like, there's a lot of different models coming out. I speak to different VCs. I've not quite heard of one where it's set up quite like this. I guess what was the driver? What was the reason that you wanted to give this opportunity to fairly inexperienced, early career, type students where, they're going to be doing a lot of learning? I mean, what was the impetus?
Yeah, so I wish I could take all the credit for this, but back in 2001, there was a group of students that formed a club and they started doing due diligence for local funds. And several entrepreneurs and investors found out about it and were like, you guys should turn this into a fund, and then help them raise what eventually became University Venture Fund, which was the predecessor fund to what we run today. And a place where that's where I started my career, joined as a student and then came on full time and ran that. before launching University Growth Fund. But really, if you think about it, like at its core, it was designed to provide opportunity to students that were underserved, because it was founded in Salt Lake City, Utah. And at the time, Utah was viewed as this flyover state. Nobody really cared. And it was hard for students to really compete for some of the best jobs on the coasts. And so, I just, honestly, like one of the things I found about myself is that I love learning and I love building things, but I really love helping people. And so for me, this is like an incredible fit across all three of those dimensions. Like I get to build this firm, I get to learn about new technologies, meet new people. It's just like drinking from a fire hose every day. So that's awesome. But then the piece that like really motivates me is this idea of like being able to help founders, of course, and also help students through this model. And it creates like this really cool win-win where like everybody's happy, everybody's winning, the model is sustainable and works. And like all of that really is really motivating for me. So
that's really cool. That's actually really interesting. And when you're looking at the interns, the structure you talked about, obviously the checks and balances. I mean, it seems like the students themselves, they're in a big leadership position. I mean, they're getting some experience that I don't know if you're an intern at a different fund how it looks, because I've never done that, so I'm not going to speak to it. But it seems like a very tremendous opportunity. I mean, from this perspective of the actual interns working there, the leadership they're gaining. I talk to us a little bit about what they experience and where they get to take with them when they're done.
Yeah, of course. That's a great question. So yeah, there's a lot of internship programs out there at venture funds. I would say in general, they're like all internship programs in that they typically have interns do the stuff they don't want to do. So sometimes it's what I call smile and dial internships, where you are on the phone calling founders and trying to, get information about their business to see if it's a fit and then sell them on why they should take capital from that fund. Sometimes it's, grunt work of doing, due diligence or supporting portfolio companies on tasks that the partners don't want to do. I think the thing that makes University Growth Fund a little more unique is the students, they're with us. They're not just with us for like a summer. They're with us usually for about 1.5 to 2 years, which gives them enough time to really gain like real experience, real insight, and work on a number of deals. And through that process, like they're the ones that are meeting with the founder. They're asking the hard questions. They're building financial models and evaluating management teams and markets. And as they go up through the program, when you're brand new, you're an intern status. But as you move up from, titles of intern to analyst to associate to senior associate, in each of those roles, you're taking on more autonomy within the deal. So you might be all of a sudden in charge of your own piece of the due diligence, and then you're mentoring somebody else that's junior to you. And then eventually like you're leading the whole deal team. And so like our students that are senior associates, they're almost like a partner at a fund. They're managing teams, they're leading the interactions with the founders. And so when they leave, it's actually interesting. Our students, like for the last 16 years, have told me that the thing they thought that, well, they knew that UGF would help them land their first job because of the experience, and it gives them something unique to talk about. What was surprising though was that it really helped them land the second job after their graduation, because in a lot of ways, if you think about it, that first job, you go from like, if you go through our program and you're a senior associate, you're leading deal teams. And then that first job, like you're back at the bottom. And it turns out that like, it's that next job where you start to get a little bit of leadership opportunity and people actually respect what you have to say, that all of a sudden, all the experience that you had at UGF, leading teams and evaluating deals and interacting with founders, all those skill sets tend to be really, really important. And being able to talk to them becomes really important in helping our students land those jobs. So I don't know if that answers your question, but hopefully that gives you some insight into like what the experience is like.
No, it does. I mean, it actually was thinking, man, these kids are going to get out there and potentially be overqualified for job one through this program, which is not a bad problem to have. That's a great problem to have. You said something that was interesting to me that I want to kind of pull into the conversation. You said you like to have a situation where you're playing games that you can repeat, meaning you want people that want to play with you again. I guess when you are putting, there's checks and balances, and you're putting interns in play. I mean, you're looking for people to come back. I mean, these interns. I mean, I don't know if we can call them interns once they're in the program for a couple of weeks, but for this podcast, we'll call them interns. I mean, they have to be doing something very impressive to have this repeat, this consistency that you guys have had over the last decade plus.
Yeah, so there's this the repeat games thing is sorry. So one of our core values is look and create win-win-win outcomes. And I talked about earlier in my intro how we give students amazing experience. They help us make good investment decisions. That drives returns for our investors, so, that they want to support the program, and it creates this virtuous flywheel, and everybody wins. It's win-win-win. And part of the logic there is that in game theory, we're all familiar with this concept of the prisoner's dilemma, where we end up in these suboptimal outcomes because really you're just playing a game one time. Right? It would be better if we collaborate, but in our own self-interest, we end up in these, less than ideal outcomes. And so the idea behind a repeat game is that you actually break prisoner's dilemma if you play the game again, right? And you can build trust. And so what we think about is this win-win concept is how can we create games where people want to play with us again and look forward to that? Because when you do that, then people are more likely to act a little bit less self-interested in the short run and more self-interested in the long run, which we believe yields much, much bigger and better outcomes. And I think, University Growth Fund is a good example of that, where one of the things that's really fun now is I work with our former students, our alumni of our program, and I talk to lots of them every day about what are they doing in their career and what's going on. But a lot of them now work at some of the top venture funds out there. They're looking at really interesting deals. Some are starting incredible companies. So just this month, I had a conversation with one of my former students yesterday who's going to bring us into a really, really hot startup. That's a brand that a lot of VCs are fighting to get into. And then simultaneously, I'm closing on another deal with one of my former students that's led by a tier 1 venture fund, where they are massively oversubscribed. And he is specifically carving out space for us because of the impact we had on him and his career. And so it's one of these things where it's we invested a lot and we tried to help those students early on. And now we're playing another game with them, right? And they're bringing us into these interesting opportunities. And they're doing it in part because they also want to provide those opportunities to our current set of students so that they have that experience and that the whole thing can move forward and be successful.
Absolutely. I love that. I guess, you do have students learning, they are growing. Not everything always goes smoothly. I guess what happens if in the case where there is a hiccup? I mean, you are obviously dealing with money, you're dealing with founders, you have a lot of different complexities in there, but what happens when something doesn't go right?
So ultimately, that's why my partner and I are there full time to make sure that, for the most part, things go really well. I think to the extent that they don't, it's a mix of, doing some sort of damage control, but then looking to create solutions and systems that remove that from occurring again. So I think we all make mistakes, that's part of life. I think the important piece is not making mistakes that are big enough that they kill you. And then assuming that you can avoid those mistakes, putting in, learning from those mistakes, putting in systems that help you avoid them in the future. So, but yeah, I mean, we're not perfect. We've made mistakes. We've learned a lot around how to teach and train and mentor students, how to source deals, how to underwrite deals, how to teach students how to do that underwriting, how to help the students interact with founders. So one of the things that we have in play is we don't my partner and I review everything before it goes out, but we have the students write everything, and we have the students actually do the communication. So we can provide some checks to ensure that there isn't anything bad that goes out. I think one of the other things that people ask me a lot about is they get concerned around confidentiality. And so I will say that confidentiality for us is one of the most important things that we hammer on. And I'm very confident in saying that I believe our students are less likely to divulge confidential information than most VCs, having now worked in the space for the last 16 years. But, that comes because we do a lot of training, we hammer at home, they sign NDAs, we take it very seriously. So that's how we try to avoid some of those situations that could kill us, right? So
that makes sense. I guess when students are going through the program and you're having to go through and replace them with other interns and other students, and this process obviously keeps going. It's not well, I guess you could hire them. I mean, it's possible you could hire them as well, but there is the cyclical, component to the model where people are leaving constantly. I mean, that does take away some of that on-the-job learning that you have to keep transferring. I guess talk to us a little bit about that component, because I'm sure if somebody's listening, it's well, eventually they leave and you have to replace them and start all over again with the next intern.
Yeah, so it's a good point. And honestly, I do feel like a broken record a lot, because I'm man, didn't we just explain this concept? And you're well, yeah, I did a year ago, and we have a whole new crew, or at least 50% of our crew is new. So, that's probably one of my bigger annoyances, is just that constantly repeating myself. But honestly, it's not that big of a price to pay. The way we've kind of overcome some of that is by having a lot of students, because there's only 3 of us full time. So we have a lot of students, but we tier them. So we're recruiting every semester. And the students are typically, and we tell students, we want you to be here minimum 2 semesters, ideally 3 or 4, maybe 5. And so what happens is they move up the ranks. So they can move from intern to analyst to associate to senior associate. Technically, they're still interns, but they have this title change. And as they get more experience, there is also an expectation that they are kind of reaching over the shoulders of the junior people and helping them get up the learning curve. And that's the only way that 3 people could manage, 50 to 60 interns. But what I have found is if you create, so backing up, I think a lot of people look at intern programs and they're interns, they're more work than they create in value. And maybe we do an internship program because we want to get back, or maybe we do an internship program because we're hoping to find some talent. I think anybody that for the most part that sets up an internship program because they're oh, this is going to create net positive value for me, might be a little overly optimistic, but I do think it's possible if you structure it right. And I think the key to all of that is creating programs where the students have real autonomy. If you give people real autonomy, they'll surprise you with what they do, in my opinion. Now, sometimes they'll surprise you by doing nothing, and those are the people you help them find something where they're more excited. But the ones that you give them some autonomy and they run with it, those are the keepers, right? And you can create incredible opportunities. So what we have is our senior associates are really ones that have demonstrated to us over multiple semesters that they love being there. And they want more autonomy so they can do more stuff, right? And they're then doing some of that stuff they're doing is on their own volition, teaching and training and mentoring the students below them and getting them up the learning curve. One of our like core values is this idea of collaborative meritocracy, where you get out of University Growth Fund what you put in, but the collaborative piece is that there's room at the top for everybody. And so even though we have a lot of like very driven type A personalities that come through the fund, like we also don't have any a-holes. And like everybody has this like collaborative mentality of like, let's lift everybody up, if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, it's actually really interesting because everything you mentioned, and I think if anyone thinks about the internships they might have had in their careers, I mean, this is a very different experience. And I guess, you know, people do start internships for various reasons, as you said. And I think when people talk about certain aspects of who they want to be and how they want to be portrayed, I think sometimes you do hear them say one thing, and then obviously you see some of the actions be different. The fact that you guys are being brought back in, your people are being hired, obviously that's a testament to what you guys are building there. When you are talking to the students and you know they're seeing the success, is it a hard sell to convince them to actually join the program, or is it like, hey, they see it and they're like, it's a great opportunity? How does that recruitment piece look for you?
So it's pretty selective. We have about a 6 to 8% acceptance rate into our program. So we'll get, you know, hundreds of applications for a handful of spots. So it is competitive, but, you know, talking out of the other side of my mouth, like, I think what's tricky as a student is you don't know what you don't know yet. And, you know, I can't tell you how many students, even some of our best students that really worked hard and put in a lot of time and effort when they were with us, have looked back after they've started their career and said, you know, I didn't really understand how incredible of an opportunity this was. And I wish that I had like the understanding I have now, because I would have like done it even different, you know, better. I would have approached it differently. And so I think like that's probably the hardest part, is like students will apply because they're like, oh, you can help me land this job in investment banking or venture or whatever it might be. And they're kind of looking at us as like a means to an end of landing that first job. And I'm still trying to figure out to this day, like, how do I connect with students in such a way that like they can see the full vision of and understand like the opportunity that University Growth Fund is, so that they can take more advantage of it, if that makes sense. And it's hard. And like, I think some part of the challenge is like, you don't know what you don't know. And two, you don't even know who you are yet as a person. You're still trying to figure that out. That's why you're in college to a certain degree. But every once in a while, like the light bulb clicks, you know, and students just like fall in love with what we're doing. And like, that's magical, because like then the work isn't work anymore. You know, they're thinking about it, dreaming about it, reading all about it, you know, and it's just, and loving it. And that's when they ultimately, I think, end up being the most successful. And I think that's pretty true across like all careers, right? It's like when things click and you're just loving it and the work's, you know, isn't that hard, isn't work anymore, right? You're just thriving. Like that's when you know you're in a good spot.
That's actually fantastic. And if somebody hasn't gone to look up the University Growth Fund to see, I mean, you guys invest in some really well-known names now, obviously. So, you know, and I think just to put context to the conversation, I mean, these are big brands, big names you guys have invested in, you know, obviously student-led with the oversight you're talking about. I guess when you think about the fund itself, I mean, you could take a different approach. I mean, obviously you want to do this. You yourself were a part of this. I want to ask you a fair question, because I don't want to ask it incorrectly. But where would you want the fund to go? Is it doing what it should be doing, and the size of the fund is secondary? Or because obviously for VCs that's important, but you're also doing something more. So I was actually been listening to you, and I'm like, he could probably do a different model, and it would be a bigger fund maybe, but then he would not be giving back the way he is. So I kind of was like, not sure how I'm going to ask that question, but I guess the question is like, I'll just leave it like that so you can answer it, actually.
It's fair enough. There's a bunch of things in there. One, I'll just flag, a lot of times people that are a little more skeptical are like, oh, that's cool. You've got like 50 interns that do all the work for you. And so you just sit back and chill on the beach. And I'm like, oh man, if you only knew, like, it would be easier for me to just do this on my own. But the student aspect is really important. And one of the reasons why it's so important is because, and why we put so much time and energy into creating a really great experience for our students, is because we believe that it's something that makes us unique and differentiated versus other venture funds. So when I meet with a founder, it's not a like, you know, frankly, like middle-aged white man pitching that, like running another fund, like, you know, probably 50, 60, 70% of venture funds out there pitching them on a similar story of like, oh, I can connect you to some people. Our pitch is you get to give back by taking capital, which is really cool, right? Like, where else in your life will somebody give you money in exchange for like helping them out, and like you feel good about it at the end of the day? So it's kind of this unique value prop. And then, by the way, I also have like 50 to 60 of the brightest students across 14 universities that will like plug in to help you with stuff. And so like that's the pitch, and we feel like it's a very differentiated pitch. It doesn't work for everybody, right? But I think most founders are really good people at heart, and they love this concept and idea. But getting back to your question, like, why not just like do something totally different? So outside of like, one, that I love what I do, and two, I think it's a very differentiated approach. I think the other piece is like, what I want to do eventually is I do want to build a bigger platform and raise more capital. I never want to be in a position where I have to compete with like Sequoia on a deal. I want the founder to be like, hey, Sequoia, you lead the deal, and we're going to carve out some for UGF to participate in, right? That's the deal I want to be in. So I know I never want to be in that position, because I know, like, as cool as we are, we probably lose the fight against Sequoia if the founder's got to choose between the two, which is fine. The flip side, though, is I want to have more impact. I want to impact a lot more than 50 to 60 students every year. And so one of the things that we're exploring in real time is the idea of expanding the asset classes that we currently offer. So maybe we raise a private credit fund, private equity, real estate. Maybe we bifurcate our current fund into early and growth stage. Maybe we do a fund-to-fund strategy. What are the ways in which we can create compelling opportunities for students to gain access to real-world experience that frankly isn't taught in schools and is typically very hard to get your foot in the door? And I think venture is that first one, but I think there's a lot of other assets that we could offer. And as the AUM grows across all of these assets, ideally we would be opening more offices in more cities and impacting more students at more universities.
That's very cool. I love it, Peter. I definitely appreciate the opportunity to learn a little bit more, and I think a very unique way of running a fund and giving back. So fantastic. If somebody does want to learn more, if somebody has a follow-up question, what's a good way of getting in touch?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, and you can find our website, ugrowthfund.com, if you want to learn more about our program. And then I also have a podcast at vc.fm where we talk about all things venture capital. A partner from Lightspeed recently told me, and my partner, that our podcast is like VC podcast for beginners. So if you're just like venture curious, we talk about all of the basic things you need to understand so that you can listen to other VC podcasts and understand what's going on. And then I also have a YouTube channel where I do the same thing, but more visually, which is at VC Pete. So yeah, those are all the different ways to interact with me. And love to be helpful to those in the audience that have questions or other areas where I can be supportive.
Absolutely. Definitely appreciate the time. Thanks for coming on and sharing with us.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. It's been a really fun conversation.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, it's a fantastic opportunity to learn about somebody actually doing something different within a space that you wouldn't think otherwise. And Peter took us through how the University Growth Fund leverages and works with interns to give them experience, have the right checks and balances to make sure that they're learning the right things at the right times and making sure that they're supported. And he has a vision to see this grow even further. And it's a great mission. So please share this episode with somebody who might actually also like to participate if they're within the area or just wants to learn more and about a new model out there. We always don't hear them, but in this case we did. And I'd appreciate that. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.